I'm standing in ICU room 347 at St. Catherine's Hospital, staring at my daughter's unconscious face. The machines around her bed beep steadily, confirming what the surgeons just told me. Emily will survive. Her heart, the organ she's spent her entire career repairing in others, nearly killed her today. But the surgery was successful. She'll wake up in a few hours. In my trembling hand, I'm holding a white envelope, legal-sized, sealed with red wax. A detail Emily will recognize immediately. Inside is a single document that will destroy every assumption she's made about her future. My hand shakes as I place it carefully on her bedside table, positioning it so it will be the first thing she sees when she opens her eyes. The irony isn't lost on me. 5 hours ago, I was standing in a different hallway of this same hospital, clutching surgical consent forms in my sweaty palms, when I heard words that stopped my heart more effectively than any cardiac event ever could. Your death would solve all my problems. My daughter, my only child. The girl I carried for 9 months, raised alone after her father died, put through medical school by selling everything I owned. She said those words, not in anger, not in the heat of some argument. She said them coolly, calculatedly to her husband Brandon as they discussed the timeline of my planned institutionalization. You might be watching this from your living room right now, maybe shaking your head, thinking this can't be real. No daughter would say that about her mother. I thought the same thing. For about 60 seconds, I tried to convince myself I'd misheard, that the pre-surgery stress was making me paranoid, that my Emily, my brilliant, accomplished surgeon Emily, couldn't possibly mean what I'd just heard. Then Brandon laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Don't worry, babe. Once we get the dementia paperwork signed, we can have her declared incompetent within a month. She'll die in that facility, never knowing we took everything." That's when my heart didn't break. It turned to ice. It transformed into something cold and strategic. Something that remembered I hadn't built a multi-million-dollar business by being naive or weak. So I left that hallway, filed the surgical consent forms like a devoted mother, sat in the surgical waiting room for 4 hours while they cracked open my daughter's chest and repaired her failing heart. And during those 4 endless hours, I made phone calls. Many, many phone calls. Now I'm standing here, looking at Emily's peaceful, pale face, knowing that in a few hours she'll wake up and discover I've done something she never anticipated, something that will prove more devastating than any surgery, any disease, any death. What's in that envelope? What did I leave for my daughter to find? Let me back up and tell you how this nightmare started, because this story isn't about one horrible sentence spoken in a hospital corridor. This goes back 3 years, to the day my husband died, and the series of small betrayals I was too blind or too loving to see until it was almost too late. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 67 years old, and 3 years ago, when my husband Robert died of a sudden heart attack at 64, I thought my world had ended. We'd built Whitmore Medical Supply from nothing, a garage startup back in 1985 that grew into a regional powerhouse distributing surgical equipment to hospitals across 3 states. Robert handled operations and logistics. I handled finances, contracts, and client relationships. We were partners in everything. 42 years of marriage, and we still held hands during our morning coffee. His death left me shattered, but not helpless. I knew every aspect of that business. Every contract, every vendor relationship, every profit margin. I took over completely, working 16-hour days because sleep meant facing an empty house and an empty bed. Work became my therapy, my purpose, my way of honoring Robert's memory. In the first year alone, I grew our revenue by 23%. Robert would have been proud. Emily was finishing her cardiac surgery fellowship in Boston at the time. My brilliant daughter, following in her father's footsteps, not literally, but spiritually. He'd provided medical equipment that saved lives. She actually saved them with her own hands. "I want to repair hearts, Mom," she'd told me during med school. "So no one else loses their husband the way you lost Dad." How could any mother not be proud of that? When Emily moved back home 2 years ago with her husband Brandon, I was thrilled. She'd accepted a position at St. Catherine's Hospital, the same hospital where her father had died, which felt like closing some kind of circle. She was going to save hearts in the place where we'd lost Robert's. It felt meaningful, poetic even. I offered them the guest house on my property, a beautiful converted carriage house that Robert and I had renovated years ago, thinking we'd use it for visiting grandchildren someday. 5 acres in a quiet suburb, the main house where I lived, and the guest house about 100 yards away through a little garden path. Save your money, I told Emily when she protested. Build your future. Young surgeons don't make what people think in those first years. Your student loans alone. I waved my hand. Family helps family. Your father would have insisted. She hugged me and cried, called me the best mother in the world. Brandon shook my hand, his grip firm and confident, and said I was the best mother-in-law anyone could ask for. That was my first mistake, not offering them the house, but believing the gratitude was genuine. Brandon was an investment banker, pulling in around $300,000 a year, according to Emily. Successful, ambitious, always impeccably dressed in those expensive suits. He seemed devoted to Emily, always touching her shoulder, finishing her sentences, calling her babe with what I thought was affection. My second mistake was not questioning why a man making that kind of money was so intensely interested in my estate planning. It started about 6 months after they moved in. Sunday dinners at my house had become our tradition. Emily's schedule was brutal, so Sundays were sacred family time. One night, Brandon cleared his throat during dessert. "Margaret, I've been thinking about your estate planning," he said, leaning forward with this concerned expression. "You've built something incredible with the business, but have you considered the tax implications? Estate taxes could take 40% of everything you've worked for, 40% that should go to Emily." I blinked, caught off guard. "Well, I have a will. My attorney Patricia handled everything after Robert died." "A standard will isn't enough anymore," Brandon insisted. "You need trusts, tax shelters, strategic asset protection. My firm has financial advisors who specialize in this. I could set up a meeting. As a favor, no charge for the consultation." Emily nodded enthusiastically. "Mom, Brandon's really good at this stuff. You should at least hear what they have to say." I was touched, honestly. My son-in-law cared about preserving Robert's legacy for Emily. What devoted family wouldn't want to protect an inheritance from government overreach? So I met with Brandon's financial advisor, signed some documents Brandon explained were tax optimization vehicles. Restructured some accounts he said would maximize Emily's eventual inheritance while minimizing your tax burden now. I trusted him. More importantly, I trusted Emily. She was a doctor, for God's sake, a surgeon who saved lives. Why would I question her husband's financial advice? My third mistake was not recognizing that Emily's sudden concern for my health was actually manipulation. It started so subtly I didn't notice at first. Little comments, dropped casually into conversation. "Mom, did you remember to lock the back door last night? I checked this morning and it was open." I absolutely had locked it. I always locked it. But Emily looked so concerned that I started doubting myself. "Mom, you said we were having dinner Thursday, but I have it in my calendar as Tuesday." It was definitely Thursday. I'd written it down, but she showed me her phone calendar. Tuesday, 6 p.m., dinner with Mom, and I started wondering if I'd gotten confused. "Mom, you're repeating yourself. You told me that story about Mrs. Henderson's contract renegotiation twice this week." I wasn't repeating myself. I'd told her once, 4 days ago. But the way she said it, with that gentle, patient voice doctors use with confused elderly patients, made me question my own memory. At first, I laughed these moments off. I'm 67, not 87. My mind is sharp. I negotiate complex contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I manage a business with 17 employees and millions in revenue. But Emily's a doctor. When your daughter, who spent 12 years in medical training, expresses concern about your cognitive health, you listen. The suggestions became more frequent. Maybe I should consider scaling back at work. Stress isn't good at my age. Maybe I should hire a financial manager to help me, take some burden off my shoulders. Maybe I should see a doctor, just to establish a baseline, rule out any early signs of decline. That last suggestion actually scared me enough that I made an appointment with my internist, Dr. Yamamoto, who'd been treating me for 20 years. He ran a full cognitive screening, memory tests, problem-solving exercises, the works, perfect scores across the board. "Margaret," Dr. Yamamoto said with a smile, "your mind is sharper than mine, and I'm 10 years younger. Whatever your daughter's worried about, it's not cognitive decline. You're healthy, alert, and frankly, you could probably run circles around people half your age." I felt vindicated, relieved, almost giddy with it. When I told Emily the results over our next Sunday dinner, her smile seemed forced, tight. "That's wonderful, Mom," she said. But then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Though you know, early-stage dementia doesn't always show up in standard screenings. You might want a specialist evaluation, someone who really knows what to look for." That comment stuck in my mind, like a splinter. Why was she pushing this? Dr. Yamamoto was a respected physician. His evaluation was thorough. Why wasn't that good enough? But I pushed the thought aside. Emily was busy. 40-hour surgical weeks, research publications, teaching residents. I saw less of her, which I understood. A cardiac surgeon's schedule isn't exactly flexible. Brandon, however, I saw more of. He started appearing at my office unannounced, asking to review vendor contracts, suggesting I was paying suppliers too much, questioning decisions I'd made successfully for decades. Once, he actually tried to attend a client meeting with me, claiming he wanted to understand the business better for estate planning purposes. My office manager, Linda, stopped him at the door. "Mr. Carson, client meetings are confidential. Margaret hasn't authorized your attendance." He smiled, but his eyes went cold. "I'm family, Linda. Just trying to help my mother-in-law." After he left, Linda came into my office. "Margaret, why is Emily's husband so interested in your business operations?" I didn't have a good answer. The moment I should have acted, but didn't, came about 6 months ago. I was hosting one of our Sunday dinners, and Brandon stepped out onto my patio to take a phone call. I was in the kitchen, opening a bottle of wine, when I heard his voice through the open window. "Yeah, the business appraisal came back at $4.2 million. Better than we thought. Once we get the dementia diagnosis, we can trigger the power of attorney clause and—" My hand froze on the wine bottle. He was talking about me, about my business, about a dementia diagnosis I didn't have. I should have confronted him right then, demanded to know what he meant, called Emily out there and asked what the hell was going on. But I didn't. Something stopped me. Maybe shock, maybe disbelief, maybe the business instincts I'd honed over 40 years. In negotiations, you don't show your hand too early. You gather information first. You wait until you have the full picture. So I said nothing that night, served dinner with shaking hands, smiled and laughed at Brandon's jokes, hugged Emily goodbye. And then I started paying very, very close attention. I noticed Emily's colleague from the hospital, Dr. Richard Moss, suddenly appearing at family gatherings. He was a psychiatrist, which seemed odd. Why would a cardiac surgeon and a psychiatrist be friends? They didn't even work in the same department. One evening, Dr. Moss sat next to me at a dinner party Emily hosted. He started asking questions that seemed casual but felt calculated. "Margaret, how's your memory these days? Do you ever walk into a room and forget why you're there? What year is it? Who's the current president? Have you noticed any changes in your ability to manage complex tasks?" I answered every question perfectly, easily. He seemed almost disappointed. That's when I knew, really knew, that something was terribly, terribly wrong. The next morning, I called my attorney, Patricia Chen. My hands were shaking as I dialed. "Patricia, I need to ask you about some documents I signed a few months ago. Brandon said they were tax shelters. Can you pull my file and review them? The pause on the other end of the line lasted too long. Margaret, Patricia finally said, her voice careful, these aren't tax shelters. This is a revised will leaving your entire estate to Emily, and a durable power of attorney that activates if you're declared mentally incompetent by 2 physicians. Who prepared these? Ice flooded my veins. Brandon's financial advisor. Did I review these before you signed them? No. Brandon said they were standard tax documents, that I didn't need to bother you with the expense of a legal review for something so routine. Another pause. Margaret, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., and don't tell Emily or Brandon you're coming. I hung up and sat in my study, staring at the family photo on my desk. Emily, at her medical school graduation, arm around me, both of us beaming with pride and joy. My brilliant daughter, the child I'd sacrificed everything for. Was she really plotting to have me declared insane? To steal everything Robert and I had built? Or was Brandon manipulating her, using her, pulling strings while she remained somehow innocent? I needed to know the truth. I needed to be absolutely certain before I did anything. Because if I was wrong, if this was all some terrible misunderstanding, I'd destroy my relationship with my only child over paranoia and suspicion. But if I was right, then I needed evidence. Irrefutable, undeniable evidence that would hold up in court and protect everything Robert and I had built. That's when I made my decision. I was going to investigate my own daughter. Patricia's office felt different that Tuesday morning. The familiar leather chairs and mahogany desk that had always represented security and stability now felt like props in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Margaret, I need to ask you something directly, Patricia said, sliding the power of attorney document across her desk. Did you understand what you were signing when you put your name here? I read it carefully this time, without Brandon's rushed explanations and Emily's encouraging smiles clouding my judgment. The language was crystal clear. If 2 physicians certified that I was mentally incompetent, Emily would have complete control over my assets, my business, my medical decisions, everything. She could institutionalize me, sell my company, empty my accounts, make every decision about my life while I had no say whatsoever. I thought it was standard estate planning, I whispered, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. Brandon said everyone with significant assets does this. Patricia's expression was a mixture of anger and pity. It is standard for someone with genuine documented cognitive decline, early Alzheimer's, advanced dementia, severe brain injury. But Margaret, you're one of the sharpest clients I have. You negotiate million-dollar contracts. You run a complex business. Why on earth would you need this now? That's when I told her everything. The strange memory accusations, the suggestions that I was confused or forgetful. Dr. Moss and his screening questions. Brandon's sudden obsessive interest in my finances. The phone conversation I'd overheard about triggering the power of attorney clause. Patricia listened without interrupting, but her face grew darker with every detail I shared. Margaret, I need you to do something that's going to feel wrong, she finally said. I need you to go home, act completely normal, and document everything. Every conversation where they suggest you're forgetful. Every interaction that feels manipulative. Every question, every comment, every suggestion. Can you do that? My hands were shaking. Patricia, do you really think my daughter is trying to... I think your son-in-law is financially desperate, Patricia interrupted, her voice firm. And desperate people do terrible things. Whether Emily is a willing participant or someone being manipulated, we need to find out. And we need evidence that will hold up in court if this goes where I think it's going. Court. The word made my stomach turn. I was talking about potentially building a legal case against my own child. Patricia picked up her phone. I'm calling Michael Torres. He's a private investigator, former FBI, completely discreet. If there's something to find, Michael will find it. A private investigator? My voice cracked. To spy on my daughter? To protect yourself from people who may be planning to steal your life, Patricia said bluntly. Margaret, if I'm wrong, we'll apologize and move on. But if I'm right, you need to be ready. 3 days later, Michael Torres sat across from me in my office after hours. He looked nothing like the private investigators in movies. No trench coat, no fedora. Just a mild-mannered man in his mid-50s with gray hair and kind eyes. He could have been anyone's uncle. But his questions were sharp and precise. Mrs. Whitmore, has anyone suggested you see a specific doctor recently? Someone who's not your regular physician? Dr. Richard Moss, I said. Emily keeps insisting I should see him for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. She says he's a specialist in geriatric psychiatry. Michael made notes. And this Brandon Carson, does he have access to your business accounts or financial records? No, but he's asked for login credentials multiple times. Says he wants to help me monitor things, catch any irregularities. I haven't given them to him. Good, don't. In fact, I want you to change every password you have. Business accounts, personal banking, email, everything. Update your security protocols. Make sure only people you absolutely trust have access to anything. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I ran my business, negotiated contracts, managed employees. During Sunday dinners, I performed the hardest role of my life, the oblivious, slightly confused mother. When Emily said, "Mom, you left the stove on this morning," I came by and found it burning on high with nothing on it. I pretended to be flustered and concerned, even though I knew for a fact I hadn't used the stove that morning. I'd had coffee and toast, the toaster, not the stove. When Brandon suggested I looked really tired and maybe should consider stepping back from the stress of running the business, I smiled weakly and said, maybe he was right, even though I wanted to throw my wine glass at his lying face. When Dr. Moss appeared at yet another family gathering and asked me, again, about my memory, my decision-making ability, my capacity to handle complex tasks, I answered every question perfectly, while the recording device Patricia had given me captured every word from my jacket pocket. But the breakthrough that changed everything came from an unexpected source. I was having lunch with Linda Chen, my operations manager, and Patricia's sister-in-law, when she mentioned something that made my blood run cold. Margaret, did you authorize a business valuation last month? My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. What? No. Why would we need a valuation? Because Mercer and Associates called asking for our complete financial records, revenue, expenses, contracts, client lists, asset inventory, everything. They said you'd requested a full company appraisal for estate planning purposes. I told them I'd need your direct authorization in writing before releasing anything. Brandon worked at Mercer and Associates. My heart started pounding so hard I thought Linda would hear it. You didn't send them anything? Of course not. But Margaret, why is someone from Brandon's firm trying to get our confidential business information? Pull records of everyone who's contacted you about the business in the last 6 months, I said, my voice tight. Every call, every email, every inquiry. I need to see all of it. What Linda found over the next 2 days made me physically ill. Brandon had been systematically contacting my vendors, my clients, my bank, claiming to be helping Mrs. Whitmore organize her affairs and asking detailed questions about contracts, account balances, payment terms, and business relationships. Some had refused to talk to him. Others, trying to be helpful to Margaret's son-in-law, had shared information they absolutely should not have. He'd been building a complete financial picture of everything I owned, not for tax purposes, for takeover. One vendor, a surgical equipment manufacturer I'd worked with for 15 years, had actually emailed Brandon a confidential price list and contract terms. Brandon had replied, "Perfect. Once we have control of Whitmore Medical, we'll be renegotiating these terms. Appreciate your cooperation. Once we have control. Not once Margaret retires. Not once we inherit. Once we have control." I sat in my office at midnight, reading through Linda's compiled records, and felt something inside me harden into cold steel. Then Michael's preliminary report arrived. I opened the envelope with shaking hands and read words that destroyed any remaining hope that this was all some misunderstanding. Subject: Brandon Michael Carson, financial investigation. Current financial status: critical. Brandon had $847,000 in gambling debts. Not stock market losses or bad business investments, gambling, illegal offshore betting operations, high-stakes poker games, sports betting with organized crime connections. He'd lost his own money first, then mortgaged their home without Emily's knowledge, then borrowed from increasingly dangerous people when legitimate sources cut him off. His firm was investigating him for insider trading. The SEC had opened a formal inquiry. He was approximately 60 days, Michael's exact words, from financial and possibly criminal collapse. And Emily? Michael had traced $230,000 in transfers from Emily's personal accounts to Brandon's over the past 18 months. She'd been covering his losses, paying his debts, using her salary, her savings, everything she had. But she'd run out of money 6 months ago. 6 months ago, right when Brandon started showing up at my office. Right when Emily started suggesting I had memory problems. Right when Dr. Moss entered our lives. The timeline was perfect and devastating. I called Patricia immediately. "I have the report." "How bad?" "Worse than we thought." My voice was surprisingly steady. "Brandon has nearly $1 million in gambling debts to dangerous people. Emily's been covering for him but ran out of money 6 months ago. That's when they started planning to have me declared incompetent." "Margaret, this changes things. If Brandon's involved with organized crime figures, you could be in physical danger, not just financial danger." Physical danger. The words hung in the air. What do I do? "We need more evidence. I need you to set a trap." 3 days later, I invited Emily and Brandon to Sunday dinner. I made sure to sound slightly scattered on the phone, uncertain about the date, asking Emily to remind me what day it was. "Are you okay, Mom?" Emily asked, concern dripping from every word. "Oh, yes, sweetheart. Just tired. All this work at the company, you know. Actually, I've been thinking about something I wanted to discuss with you both." They arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, both smiling, Brandon carrying flowers. I served pot roast, Emily's favorite, and made small talk about her surgeries, his work, the weather. Then, over dessert, I dropped my bomb. "I've been thinking about selling the business," I said, deliberately making my voice sound weary and uncertain. "I'm getting so tired. Maybe it's time to retire, travel a bit, enjoy life while I still can. Just simplify everything." The look that passed between Emily and Brandon was one I'd never forget. Emily's eyes lit up. "Mom, that's wonderful. You've worked so hard for so long. You deserve rest. What are you thinking? Full sale to a competitor? Merger?" "I'm not sure yet," I said vaguely. "But I wanted you to know that whatever I decide, you'll be taken care of. You're my whole world, sweetheart. Everything I have is for you." Emily came around the table and hugged me. "I love you, Mom. You're the best mother anyone could ask for." Brandon raised his wine glass. "To Margaret and to whatever comes next." I smiled and nodded, playing my role perfectly. Then I excused myself to take a phone call, a fake call to no one, and left them alone in the dining room. The recording device I'd installed under the table the previous night captured every word they said. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, pretending to have a conversation while I listened to their voices drift in from the other room. "Emily, did you hear her? She sounds so confused. Talking about selling now, like she can just make that decision alone." Brandon, "This is bad, Em. Really bad. If she sells now, we're completely screwed. The will leaves you the business, not liquid assets. If she converts everything to cash, she could spend it all, donate it to charity, change her mind about everything." Emily, "So what do we do?" Brandon, "We accelerate the timeline. I'll call Moss tonight. He can have the evaluation scheduled this week. Once she's declared incompetent, you trigger the power of attorney, block the sale, take over operations, and we leverage the business value to pay off my debts." A long pause. Then Emily's voice, quieter, uncertain. "Brandon, I don't know if I can actually do this. She's my mother." "She's your mother who's about to lose everything to dementia anyway," Brandon said, his voice hard. "We're actually protecting her, if you think about it. And protecting ourselves. Unless you want to lose everything when my debts come due and those people come looking for payment? Your name is on our mortgage, Em. You're legally liable for my debts. They'll come after you, too. You told me you'd stopped," Emily said, and I heard tears in her voice. "You promised me the gambling was over. It is over, but the debts aren't, and this is our only way out. It's her or us, babe. Her comfortable life in a nice memory care facility where she won't even know what she's lost, or our lives destroyed. Your career ruined, my criminal charges, everything gone. What would you choose?" The silence lasted forever. Then Emily's voice, so quiet I almost missed it. "Okay, call Dr. Moss. Set up the evaluation." I stood in my kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to my daughter agree to destroy my life. Not out of malice or hatred, out of fear and desperation and manipulation by a man who'd gambled away their future and was now gambling with mine. That night, after they left, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't break down. I called Patricia. "I have everything we need," I told her, my voice eerily calm. Audio recordings of them planning to have me declared incompetent this week. Evidence of Brandon's gambling debts and criminal exposure. Documentation of the fraudulent power of attorney. What do I do now? Patricia's voice was quiet, serious. "Margaret, what I'm about to suggest is nuclear. Once you do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with Emily will likely be destroyed forever. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" I looked at my reflection in the dark window. 67 years old, widowed, betrayed by the one person I'd loved more than life itself. "I'm certain," I said. "Tell me exactly what to do." Patricia's conference room became my war room. Over the next 3 weeks, while I continued playing the role of confused, declining mother at Sunday dinners, I systematically dismantled every piece of the trap Emily and Brandon had built around me. Michael's investigation had expanded beyond Brandon's gambling debts. What he discovered made the betrayal so much deeper, so much worse than I could have imagined. Dr. Richard Moss wasn't just a corrupt psychiatrist willing to fake a diagnosis for money. He was a predator with a system. "Margaret, you need to see this," Michael said, spreading documents across Patricia's conference table. "I found 2 previous cases, both elderly patients, both declared incompetent by Dr. Moss, despite questionable evidence, both now in permanent psychiatric care while their families control their estates." My hands went cold. What happened to them? One died within 8 months of institutionalization. The other attempted suicide twice and is now so heavily medicated she doesn't recognize her own name. In both cases, the families sold off assets within weeks of the competency ruling. And nobody investigated? Dr. Moss is careful. He uses legitimate diagnostic tools, but manipulates the testing conditions, leading questions designed to confuse, stress-inducing scenarios, time pressure, deliberate interruptions during cognitive tasks. Then he writes reports emphasizing early warning signs and recommends immediate intervention, meaning institutionalization before the patient can seek a second opinion or hire their own expert. I felt sick. This wasn't just Brandon's scheme. Emily had chosen to work with a man who'd done this before, who'd destroyed other people's lives for profit. "There's more," Michael said grimly, pulling out printed emails. "I obtained these through legal subpoena after documenting evidence of fraud. These are communications between Dr. Moss and your daughter." The emails went back 4 months. I read them with hands that shook so badly, Patricia had to hold the pages steady for me. From Emily Whitmore, E. Whitmore, S. Catharines. Org 2, Richard Moss, or Moss, mindwellpsych.com. Date, September 15th. Subject, timeline rich. Brandon's situation is getting critical. Creditors are making threats. How quickly can we move on the evaluation? Mom's attorney is getting suspicious about the POA documents. We need her declared incompetent before she can revoke anything or change her will. From Richard Moss to Emily Whitmore. Date, September 16th. Subject, RE timeline. I can conduct the evaluation next week if you can get her to my office. I'll use the stress protocol. Works every time with elderly patients. Nobody passes when they're deliberately kept off balance. Diagnosis ready within 48 hours. My fee is $50,000, same as we discussed. Make sure your POA is properly filed with the county clerk before we proceed. Once she's declared incompetent, the clock starts ticking. You'll need to institutionalize within 72 hours to prevent her from contesting. From Emily Whitmore to Richard Moss. Date, September 16th. Subject, RE, timeline agreed. Brandon is handling the county filing this week. I'll get Mom to your office under the pretense of a wellness screening. She trusts me completely. She won't know what's happening until it's already done. After the evaluation, how quickly can we move her to a facility? From Richard Moss to Emily Whitmore. Date, September 17th. Subject, timeline. I have relationships with 3 facilities that accept urgent placements. They're comfortable but secure. She won't be able to leave or contact anyone without supervision. Standard protocol is 72-hour psychiatric hold, then permanent placement. Once she's in, it's nearly impossible to get out without another psychiatrist's evaluation, which won't happen if she's properly medicated. You'll have complete control. I read that last line 3 times. She trusts me completely. My daughter, weaponizing my love. Planning my imprisonment with the casual efficiency of someone scheduling a business meeting. But there was another email, one that Michael highlighted specifically. From Emily Whitmore to Brandon Carson. Date, October 3rd. Subject, I can't do this. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every time I see Mom, I feel like I'm going to throw up. She looks at me with so much love, so much trust, and I'm planning to lock her away like she's nothing, like she didn't sacrifice everything for me. I hate myself. I hate what we're doing. There has to be another way. From Brandon Carson to Emily Whitmore. Date, October 3rd. Subject, I can't do this. There is no other way. You think I want this? You think I'm proud of where we are? But if we don't do this, we lose everything. Those people I owe money to don't negotiate, Em. They don't give extensions. They break legs. They burn houses. They make people disappear. And when they come for me, they'll come for you too, because your name is on everything. So yes, your mother goes into a facility. Yes, we take control of her assets. Yes, we pay off my debts and save ourselves. Or we can do nothing. And in 3 months we'll both be destroyed. Or dead. Your choice. Patricia read over my shoulder. She's terrified of him. That doesn't excuse what she's doing, but it provides context. Does it matter? My voice sounded hollow. She still made the choice. Every day, she chose to continue this. Michael pulled out another set of documents. There's something else you need to know. Brandon's been meeting with your business competitors, specifically MedTech Solutions and regional medical distributors. He's been shopping information about your client contracts, your pricing, your proprietary relationships. He's trying to sell my business? I felt dizzy. Worse, he's trying to tank its value so he can buy it himself through a shell corporation, then flip it for profit. He's been telling your competitors about upcoming ownership changes and suggesting they hold off on contract renewals because new management will be more flexible on pricing. I stared at the documents. Brandon wasn't just planning to steal my business through Emily's power of attorney. He was planning to destroy its value first, acquire it for nothing, then sell it to the highest bidder. He's been doing this for 2 months, Michael continued. 3 of your major clients have already delayed contract renewals based on Brandon's suggestions. Your business is currently worth about $4.2 million. If those contracts don't renew, it drops to maybe $2 million. That's $4.2 million he's stealing from you through manipulation. The room spun. This wasn't desperate people making a terrible choice. This was calculated, systematic destruction of everything Robert and I had built. What are my legal options? I asked Patricia. She opened a thick legal folder. You have several paths. Option 1, criminal prosecution. We file charges for elder abuse, fraud, attempted theft, conspiracy. Dr. Moss will definitely go to prison. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Brandon will likely face charges. Emily, she paused. Emily could lose her medical license and face felony charges as a co-conspirator. What's option 2? Civil approach. You revoke all the fraudulent documents, restructure your estate to exclude them completely, file restraining orders, and let their own debts and consequences destroy them without you actively pursuing criminal charges. Emily keeps her career but loses any inheritance forever. And option 3? Patricia slid a document across the table. The nuclear option. You create an irrevocable trust. Everything you own goes into it. Business, property, investments, everything. You name yourself as primary beneficiary for life. With distributions managed by independent trustees, I'll help you select. Upon your death, the trust assets go to designated charities. Emily receives exactly $1, as does Brandon. The trust document explicitly states why: attempted fraud, elder abuse, and betrayal. This becomes public record? If they challenge it, yes. And they will challenge it, which means a public court case. Every email, every recording, every piece of evidence becomes part of the public record. Emily's colleagues will know. The medical board will know. Everyone will know what she tried to do. I stared at the trust document. This wasn't just disinheriting Emily. This was publicly destroying any chance of reconciliation, ever. This was scorched earth. There's one more thing I need to tell you, Patricia said quietly. If you do this, I strongly recommend you disappear afterward. Sell the business, liquidate everything, relocate to another state where they can't find you. Because, Margaret, when people this desperate realize they've lost everything, they stop thinking rationally. Brandon has connections to dangerous people. If he thinks you're the reason his life is destroyed... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. You think they might actually hurt me? I think the threat is real enough that we should take precautions. That night, I sat alone in my study, looking at photos of Emily throughout her life. Her first birthday, chocolate cake smeared across her face. First day of kindergarten, missing her 2 front teeth. High school graduation, medical school white coat ceremony. Her wedding day when she'd whispered, "I'm so lucky to have you as my mom." When had it all gone wrong? Had I loved her too much? Given her too much? Failed to teach her the difference between want and need, between struggle and sacrifice? Or had Brandon simply found someone vulnerable, drowning in student debt, desperate to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't afford, terrified of losing the man she loved, and twisted that vulnerability into betrayal? I would never know for certain. And it didn't matter anymore. 3 days later, everything accelerated in a way I hadn't predicted. Emily called me, her voice bright and cheerful in a way that now sounded sinister. "Mom! Wonderful news! Dr. Moss had a cancellation and can see you tomorrow for that comprehensive evaluation we discussed. Can you make 2 p.m.? My heart pounded. This was it. The trap was springing. Tomorrow I would walk into Dr. Moss's office, submit to his fraudulent evaluation designed to make me fail, and within 48 hours be declared incompetent. Within 72 hours, I'd be institutionalized in a locked psychiatric facility, drugged and isolated, while Emily and Brandon dismantled my life. Tomorrow? I made my voice uncertain, slightly confused. I thought that was next month? No, Mom. We discussed this last week, remember? The gaslighting even now, even knowing what I knew. Oh. Oh yes, of course. 2 p.m. I'll be there. Perfect. I'll pick you up at 1:30. We'll go together. She was planning to personally deliver me to my own destruction. I hung up and immediately called Patricia. They're moving. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Then so are we, Patricia said, her voice sharp and focused. I'm filing the revocation of power of attorney within the hour. The new trust documents will be executed tonight at my office. I'll have the notary standing by. I'm sending a courier to deliver copies to Emily and Brandon tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., 5 hours before your scheduled appointment. And Margaret? Yes? Pack a bag. After tomorrow, you're not going back to that house. I have a furnished apartment across town ready for you. You'll stay there until we can arrange your permanent relocation. That night, I walked through my home one last time. The house Robert and I had bought 40 years ago, where we'd painted nurseries and celebrated birthdays and grown old together, where Emily had taken her first steps, lost her first tooth, gotten ready for her prom. I packed one suitcase, practical clothes, essential documents, medications, a few irreplaceable photos. Everything else, the furniture Emily had grown up with, the kitchen where I'd made thousands of family meals, the garden Robert and I had planted together, I left behind. I also left something else. On the kitchen table, I placed a single sealed envelope addressed to Emily. Inside was a letter I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, trying to find words that could possibly express what I was feeling. In the end, I kept it simple. Emily, I know everything. The gambling debts, Dr. Moss and his fraudulent evaluation protocol, the plan to have me institutionalized within 72 hours, the emails discussing how to leverage the business value and how I'd be properly medicated so I couldn't contest anything. Every conversation you had with Brandon, I recorded. Every email to Dr. Moss, I obtained legally. Every lie you told me about my memory, my confusion, my decline, I documented. You chose to destroy the person who loved you most in this world. Not because you hated me, but because you needed money. You were willing to lock me in a psychiatric facility, steal everything your father and I built, and let me die believing I was insane. All because your husband gambled away your future and you were too weak or too scared to leave him. You will never see me again. You will never receive another dollar from me. Everything goes into an irrevocable trust that you cannot access, cannot contest, cannot touch. Upon my death, it all goes to charity, to help medical students who have the integrity you lack. If you, Brandon, or Dr. Moss ever attempt to contact me, I will immediately file the criminal charges I'm currently holding back. Elder abuse, fraud, conspiracy, attempted theft, federal charges that will destroy all three of you. You destroyed our relationship the moment you looked your husband in the eye and said, "Okay, call Dr. Moss, set up the evaluation." So I'm giving you exactly what you wanted. I'm dead to you. Forever. Mother at 8:47. The next morning, while Emily and Brandon were having coffee in their kitchen, a courier knocked on their door and handed them a legal envelope. Michael Torres, watching from a discreet location across the street, recorded their reactions through a telephoto lens. According to his report, Brandon went pale, then red, then started shouting. Emily read the documents twice, her hands shaking violently, then ran to the bathroom and vomited. The screaming match that followed lasted 40 minutes and ended with Brandon punching a hole in the wall and Emily calling my phone 17 times in a row. I didn't answer. I was already gone. At 9:30 a.m., Emily and Brandon arrived at my main house using their key. They found it empty. I'd left at 6 that morning, my car already driven to my temporary apartment by one of Michael's associates. Everything valuable had been moved to secure storage. My important possessions were already relocated. What I left was that single letter on the kitchen table. Michael told me later that Emily collapsed after reading it, that she sat on the kitchen floor sobbing for over an hour while Brandon paced and cursed and made increasingly desperate phone calls. By 2 p.m., the exact time I was supposed to be in Dr. Moss's office being declared insane, I was instead sitting in a conference room at the FBI field office. Because Patricia, brilliant Patricia, had done something I hadn't authorized but deeply appreciated. She'd forwarded all evidence of Dr. Moss's fraud to federal authorities. Elder abuse. Medicare fraud, because Dr. Moss had been billing government insurance for his fraudulent evaluations. Conspiracy. The FBI was very, very interested in Dr. Richard Moss. That evening, I sat in my temporary apartment, a bland, anonymous place where nobody knew me, and watched the local news. Dr. Richard Moss had been arrested, federal charges. The story mentioned an ongoing investigation into systematic Medicare fraud and elder abuse involving multiple victims. My phone, a new number that Emily didn't have, remained silent. I'd won. I'd protected myself, my assets, my freedom, my life. I'd escaped the trap that would have destroyed me. So why did I feel like I'd lost everything that mattered? 2 weeks after I disappeared from my own life, I sat in a corporate boardroom signing documents that sold Whitmore Medical Supply, Robert's legacy, my 40-year career, everything we'd built together, to MedTech Solutions for $4.8 million. The CEO, a woman named Sarah Chen who reminded me painfully of what Emily could have been, shook my hand firmly. "Margaret, what you and your husband built here is remarkable. I promise we'll honor that legacy. Your employees will be taken care of, your client relationships respected." "Thank you," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. Robert's legacy would continue. The Whitmore name would fade, but the work would go on. Just not with our daughter, never with our daughter. The sale funds transferred directly into the irrevocable trust Patricia had created. $4.8 million that Emily and Brandon could never touch. Upon my death, every penny would fund medical scholarships for students from low-income families, students who demonstrated both academic excellence and strong moral character. The irony wasn't lost on me. Emily had traded her inheritance for someone else's daughter's future. Patricia had been busy in other ways. "Margaret, you need to know what's happening with them," she said during one of our daily calls. The medical board opened an investigation into Emily's relationship with Dr. Moss. They're questioning her judgment, her ethics. She's been placed on administrative leave pending review. My stomach twisted despite everything. Will she lose her license? Probably not permanently, if she cooperates fully and can prove she was manipulated rather than actively orchestrating fraud. But her career has a permanent stain now. She'll never practice at a top hospital again. And Brandon? Patricia paused. His firm fired him 3 days ago. The SEC investigation went public. He's facing federal insider trading charges on top of everything else. And their marriage? Emily filed for divorce last week. Papers were served at the apartment they're renting since they obviously can't stay in your guest house. Brandon's contesting, claiming she owes him spousal support since he's now unemployed due to circumstances he says were caused by her family drama. I almost laughed. Almost. He destroyed everything and wants her to pay him for it. Narcissists typically do, Patricia said dryly. Margaret, there's something else. Emily has been trying desperately to reach you. Letters to my office, I've received 14. She's shown up at your old house 6 times. She tried to contact Linda at the business before the sale went through. She even approached Michael Torres when she saw him outside your former residence. Absolutely not. I don't want contact. I understand. But I need to tell you what she's saying. She claims Brandon threatened her, that he told her if she didn't help with the plan, he'd destroy her career by revealing she'd been covering his illegal gambling debts with funds that could be traced back to patient kickbacks, which would constitute healthcare fraud and money laundering. Is that true? We don't know. It could be true, or it could be Emily reconstructing the narrative to make herself the victim. But Margaret? Patricia's voice softened. People are complicated. She can be both a victim of Brandon's manipulation and guilty of betraying you, both trapped and culpable, both desperate and wrong. Those things can coexist. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to decide how you want to remember her. As the daughter who plotted your destruction, or as the daughter who made terrible choices under unbearable pressure. Neither version erases what she did, but one might eventually allow you peace. I hung up and sat in my anonymous apartment, surrounded by the few possessions I'd kept. A photo of Emily at 5 years old, missing her front teeth, holding up a drawing she'd made me. "Best mommy in the world," the caption said in wobbly letters. Had that little girl still existed somewhere inside the woman who'd agreed to institutionalize me? Or had she been destroyed years ago by student debt and impossible expectations, and a man who'd turned her love into a weapon? Did it even matter anymore? 3 days later, Patricia called with news that shattered my carefully maintained emotional distance. "Margaret, Emily's in the hospital. St. Catherine's ICU. She had a cardiac event this morning. Acute stress cardiomyopathy, they're calling it. Broken heart syndrome, which is technically accurate even though in her case the cause is emotional trauma, not romance. Her heart is severely compromised. They're scheduling emergency surgery for tomorrow." The room tilted. Is she going to survive? The surgeon says she has a good chance, but any cardiac surgery has risks, especially given her current weakened state. "Margaret, she's asking for you. She's desperate to see you before the surgery. She told the nurses she can't go under anesthesia without seeing her mother one more time." No. The word came out flat, automatic. "Margaret, she made her choices, Patricia. I won't. She's your daughter, and she might die on that operating table." Those words hung in the air between us. My daughter might die. The child I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through chickenpox and broken hearts and med school anxiety attacks. She might die believing I hated her, believing she'd destroyed the only relationship that truly mattered. Wasn't that exactly what she deserved? But was that who I wanted to be? The mother who let her daughter face death alone, unforgiven, carrying the weight of her betrayal into surgery and possibly into death? "When is the surgery?" I heard myself ask. "Tomorrow at noon." I sat in silence for a long time. Patricia didn't push, didn't try to convince me. She just waited. "I'll come," I finally said. "But Patricia, I'm not forgiving her. I'm not reconciling. I'm not fixing this. I'm going because—" My voice cracked. "Because I need to see this through, to the end. Whatever that end is." "I understand," Patricia said softly. The next morning, I stood outside St. Catherine's Hospital, wearing sunglasses and a hat pulled low, feeling like a stranger in a place I'd visited hundreds of times over the years. This was where Robert had died 3 years ago. Where Emily had trained and built her career, where she'd saved lives while simultaneously plotting to destroy mine. I took the elevator to the ICU floor, walked past nurses who didn't recognize me, and stood outside room 347. Through the window, I could see Emily. She looked nothing like the confident surgeon who'd sat at my dinner table 6 weeks ago. She was pale, gaunt, hooked to monitors that beeped with irregular rhythms. She'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. A nurse was reviewing pre-surgical instructions with her. Emily nodded mechanically, her eyes distant and hollow. I didn't go in, not yet. Instead, I stood in that hallway and did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I let myself remember the good moments. Emily's first word, "Mama." Her high school valedictorian speech where she'd thanked me for showing her that women could build empires. Her med school acceptance when she'd called me sobbing with joy. Her first successful surgery when she'd said, "I saved a life today, Mom. I actually saved someone's life." That girl had been real. That love had been genuine. Where had it all gone so terribly wrong? The surgical team arrived at 11:45. I watched them prepare Emily for transport to the OR. She looked terrified, alone. Brandon wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. The man who'd orchestrated this entire nightmare had abandoned her the moment his scheme collapsed. And me? I was here, hidden behind a door, watching my daughter face possible death alone. 5 minutes before they were scheduled to wheel her to surgery, I made my decision. I pushed open the door and walked into room 347. Emily's eyes were closed. The monitors beeped steadily. She looked so small in that hospital bed, so vulnerable, nothing like the accomplished surgeon who'd betrayed me. "Emily," I said quietly. Her eyes opened. For a moment, she didn't seem to register who I was. Then, recognition hit like a physical blow. Shock, relief, desperate hope, and terror crossed her face in rapid succession. "Mom," she whispered. "Mom, you came. I was so afraid I'd never—" "I came to say goodbye," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "Not to reconcile, not to forgive, to say goodbye before you go into surgery, because despite everything, you're still my daughter, and I couldn't let you face this alone." Tears spilled down her face. "Mom, please, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. If I could take it all back—" "But you can't," I interrupted. "What's done is done, Emily. You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences. Or—" I glanced at the monitors. "Or you don't. Either way, this is goodbye." "Please don't leave like this," she sobbed. "Please, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know. I need you to understand." Brandon threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, he'd— "I know what he said," I cut her off. "I read the emails, Emily, all of them, the ones where he threatened you and the ones where you actively participated in planning my institutionalization. You were both victim and perpetrator, and while I understand you were trapped, you still made the choice to trap me instead of asking me for help." The surgical team appeared at the door. "Mrs. Carson, we need to take you now." Emily grabbed for my hand. I let her take it, but I didn't squeeze back. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. "I've always loved you. I know you don't believe that anymore, but it's true." I looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the last time. "I believe you love me, Emily. I also believe you were willing to destroy me to save yourself. Both of those things are true, and that's something you'll have to live with." I pulled my hand away gently but firmly. "The business is sold. The house will be sold next month. Everything is in a trust you can't access. When I leave this room, you'll never see me again. That's my choice, just as betraying me was yours." I turned toward the door, then stopped. There was one more thing she needed to know. "Emily, 5 minutes ago, a man tried to enter your room claiming to be hospital security. He wasn't. He was one of Brandon's associates. He was carrying a package of cocaine, enough for a felony charge, that he intended to plant in your bedside drawer. If the surgical team had found it, you'd be under arrest right now. Your medical license would be permanently revoked." Emily's face went white. "What?" "Brandon's final play. Frame you for drug possession, divorce you as the addict, and position himself as the innocent victim. I had Michael Torres intercept him and remove the drugs before they could be discovered. I saved you, one last time." I walked to the door and looked back at her one final time. "Survive this surgery, Emily. Rebuild your life. Learn from your mistakes. But do it without me. You wanted your freedom from the burden of a mother who loved you too much. You have it now." I walked out of room 347 and didn't look back. Behind me, I heard Emily's sobs turn into wails, heard the monitor's alarm as her heart rate spiked, heard nurses rushing in. I kept walking, down the hallway, into the elevator, out of the hospital, into the bright afternoon sunshine. I'd said goodbye. Now I had to learn how to live with it. I didn't wait at the hospital. I couldn't. Sitting in that waiting room, watching the clock tick through Emily's surgery, pretending to be just another anxious family member, I couldn't do it. Instead, I went back to my temporary apartment, made tea I didn't drink, and stared at my phone. Patricia had promised to call if anything happened, if Emily survived, if she didn't. The call came 4 hours later. She made it through surgery, Patricia said without preamble. Stable condition. The surgeons say the repair was successful. She'll be in ICU for at least 48 hours, but barring complications, she should recover. I felt something loosen in my chest. Relief I hadn't wanted to feel. Thank you for telling me. Margaret, there's something else. Brandon showed up at the hospital 30 minutes ago. Security called the police because Emily has a restraining order against him now. She filed it 2 days ago. He's being escorted out, but he's making threats, saying you poisoned Emily against him, that you're responsible for destroying their lives, that you'll pay for what you've done. Ice flooded my veins. Does he know where I'm staying? No, and we'll keep it that way. But I'm having Michael increase surveillance. Brandon's desperate and dangerous. People like him don't accept responsibility. They blame everyone else. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and thought about Brandon's threats. About how a man who'd gambled away nearly $1 million plotted to institutionalize an innocent woman and tried to frame his own wife for drug possession was now positioning himself as the victim. That's when I realized something. I wasn't finished. Not yet. The next morning, I called Patricia with a plan I'd formulated in the sleepless hours before dawn. I want to confront him, I said. Brandon. One final confrontation where I lay out everything, every crime, every betrayal, every consequence he's facing. On record, filmed. So there's no question, no ambiguity, no way for him to rewrite history. Margaret, that's dangerous. He's unstable. Then we do it somewhere public, somewhere safe, with security present. But I need him to hear from me exactly what he's done and exactly what's coming for him. Patricia was silent for a long moment. Let me make some calls. 3 days later, I sat in a conference room at Patricia's law office. Michael Torres was present, along with 2 private security personnel. A camera was set up in the corner, recording everything. Brandon arrived at 2 p.m., escorted by Patricia's assistant. He looked nothing like the confident investment banker who'd sat at my dinner table making concerned comments about my estate planning. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He saw me and stopped dead in the doorway. You, he hissed, you destroyed everything. Sit down, Brandon, Patricia said firmly. You agreed to this meeting. If you leave now, Mrs. Whitmore will file the criminal charges she's been holding back. If you stay and listen, there's a possibility, a small one, that we can resolve this civilly. That was a lie, of course. I had no intention of not filing charges, but Brandon was desperate enough to grasp at any possibility of escape. He sat down across from me, his hands clenched into fists on the table. Let's be very clear about why we're here, I said, my voice steady and cold. You plotted to have me declared mentally incompetent through a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. You planned to institutionalize me in a locked facility where I'd be drugged and isolated. You intended to steal my business and my assets to pay off your gambling debts. And when that plan failed, you attempted to frame Emily for drug possession to position yourself as the innocent victim in your divorce. That's not, Brandon started. Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharp as a blade. Don't insult me by lying. I have recordings of every conversation you had with Emily about the timeline, the evaluation, the institutionalization plan. I have emails between Emily and Dr. Moss discussing how to properly medicate me so I couldn't contest anything. I have documentation of your $847,000 in gambling debts. I have witness statements from my business vendors you contacted, trying to tank my company's value so you could acquire it cheap. I slid a folder across the table. I have bank records showing Emily transferred $230,000 to you over 18 months, covering your losses. I have evidence you mortgaged the house you shared with Emily without her knowledge. And I have video footage of your associate attempting to plant cocaine in Emily's hospital room 5 minutes before her surgery. Brandon's face went from red to white. You can't prove any of that. I can prove all of it. That's why you're here. To understand exactly what's about to happen to you. I pulled out another document. Dr. Richard Moss has been arrested on federal charges: elder abuse, Medicare fraud, conspiracy. He's currently cooperating with federal investigators, which means he's providing detailed testimony about everyone he's worked with, including you, including Emily. Brandon's jaw clenched. Emily won't testify against me. She's my wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife, Patricia interjected. And spousal privilege doesn't apply to jointly committed crimes. Emily has already been interviewed by federal investigators. She's cooperating fully to save her medical license. That was only partially true. Emily was cooperating, but we didn't know yet what she'd told them. But watching Brandon's face crumble was worth the slight exaggeration. Let me explain your situation, I continued. The SEC has evidence of your insider trading. Trades made based on confidential information from your firm's merger and acquisition department. Federal offense, 3 to 5 years minimum. I ticked off on my fingers. Elder abuse and fraud related to the attempted institutionalization, another 5 to 7 years. Conspiracy to commit Medicare fraud through Dr. Moss's scheme, that's federal, another 5 years. Attempted evidence tampering by planting drugs on Emily, another 3 to 5 years. Brandon's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow. You can't. I absolutely can. But here's what interests me most. I leaned forward. Your gambling debts. $847,000 to people who don't exactly use legal collection methods. The kind of people who, when they don't get paid, make examples of people. His eyes widened. You didn't. Oh, but I did, I said, and felt a cold satisfaction at his expression. I bought your debts, Brandon, all of them. Through an intermediary, of course. Those dangerous people you owe money to? They don't own your debt anymore. I do. The color drained completely from his face. That's not possible. It's not only possible, it's done. I paid 82 cents on the dollar, quite the discount given how unlikely you were to pay. So now, instead of owing money to criminals who break legs, you owe it to me, the woman you tried to destroy. Patricia slid another document across the table. This is the debt consolidation agreement, $847,000, due in full, with interest accruing at the maximum legal rate. Payment is due within 30 days. I don't have that kind of money, Brandon shouted. You know I don't. Then you'll declare bankruptcy, I said calmly. Which means your assets, what little you have left, will be liquidated. Your car, your possessions, any savings or retirement accounts. Everything goes to pay your creditors, which is to say, me. This is revenge, he spat. This is just you being vindictive. No, I said quietly. Revenge would be letting those criminals you owe money to continue owning your debt. Revenge would be telling them exactly where to find you and when. This is justice, Brandon. This is you facing the natural consequences of your own actions. I stood up, looking down at him. Here's what happens next. Within the week, federal investigators will contact you about the charges related to Dr. Moss's fraud scheme. The SEC will formally charge you with insider trading. The debt I now own will go into collection. And Emily's divorce will proceed, with her attorney presenting all of this evidence to ensure she receives no financial liability for your crimes. You've destroyed me, Brandon whispered. No, I corrected. You destroyed yourself. I simply stopped you from destroying me in the process. I turned to walk out, then paused at the door. Brandon, do you know what the worst part of all this is? If you had simply asked me for help, if you'd come to me 2 years ago and said, Margaret, I have a gambling problem, I've made terrible mistakes, I need help, I would have helped you. Not with $800,000, but with treatment, with counseling, with support for you and Emily. I looked back at him. I would have done it because Emily loved you, and I loved Emily. But instead, you saw me as an obstacle to be removed rather than a person who might help. That was your fatal mistake. I walked out of the conference room. Behind me, I heard Brandon break down, not crying, but making a sound like a wounded animal, rage and desperation mixed together. Michael followed me out. That was risky. He could become violent. That's why you and your team are here, I said. Make sure he leaves the building and doesn't follow me. Already arranged. I got into the car Patricia had arranged. I'd sold my own car weeks ago, and asked the driver to take me to Riverside Park. I needed air, space, time to process what I'd just done. I sat on a bench overlooking the river, watching the water flow past, thinking about the confrontation. I'd expected to feel satisfaction, vindication, triumph. Instead, I felt empty. I'd won. I'd protected myself, exposed the truth, ensured that Brandon would face consequences for his actions. But winning felt like losing when the price was my relationship with my daughter. My phone rang. Patricia. Brandon left the building 30 minutes ago, she said. But Margaret, there's something else. Emily's been discharged from the hospital. She's recovering faster than expected. And she sent something to my office for you. It's a letter, handwritten. I think you should read it. Patricia, I told her, I know what you told her. But this isn't about reconciliation or forgiveness. It's about closure, for both of you. That evening, Patricia's assistant delivered a sealed envelope to my apartment. I stared at it for an hour before I had the courage to open it. Emily's handwriting, still the same neat, precise script she'd developed in medical school, covered 3 pages. Mom, I know you told me you never want to see me again. I'm respecting that. This is the last communication I'll ever send you unless you choose otherwise. I need you to know that I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm not writing to explain or justify what I did. There is no explanation that makes it acceptable. I'm writing because you deserve to hear the complete truth from me, not from lawyers or investigators or court documents. You're right about everything. Brandon did threaten me. He told me he'd fabricated evidence that I'd taken kickbacks from pharmaceutical reps and used the money to cover his debts. He said he'd report me to the medical board, destroy my career, make sure I never worked as a surgeon again. I was terrified. But here's the truth I have to live with. Even terrified, even trapped, I had choices. I could have come to you and told you everything. I could have left Brandon the moment I realized what he was. I could have gone to the police, to a lawyer, to anyone who would help. Instead, I chose the coward's path. I chose to save myself by sacrificing you. Every time Brandon pushed for the timeline to accelerate, every time Dr. Moss asked for updated information, every time we discussed the plan to have you institutionalized, I made the choice to continue. Not once, not twice, hundreds of times over months. I told myself I was trapped. I told myself I had no choice. But I did have a choice, and I chose wrong. I chose to betray the person who loved me most in the world. The worst part isn't losing the inheritance. It isn't the medical board investigation or the stain on my career. It's knowing that when I close my eyes, I see your face in that hospital room. The way you looked at me, not with hate, but with disappointment and sadness, like you were mourning someone who'd already died. I died in that moment, Mom. Not physically, but the person I thought I was, the good daughter, the life-saving surgeon, the woman who valued integrity, she died when I saw my reflection in your eyes. I've filed for divorce. I'm cooperating fully with federal investigators. I've submitted myself to the medical board review and accepted whatever consequences they determine. I've started therapy, real therapy, not just to check a box, but because I need to understand how I became someone capable of what I did. Brandon is facing criminal charges. Dr. Moss is going to prison. And I'm facing the fact that I'm neither pure victim nor pure villain, but something more complicated and harder to reconcile. You saved my life in that hospital room, not just by stopping Brandon's associate, but by showing up. You didn't owe me that, After what I'd done, you owed me nothing. But you came anyway because despite everything, you're still my mother. I'm not asking you to contact me. I'm not asking you to forgive me or reconsider the trust or change anything about the decisions you've made. I'm simply saying thank you for giving me life twice, once when you bore me, and once when you stopped Brandon from destroying what was left of it. I hope you find peace, Mom. I hope you build a new life somewhere beautiful where no one knows this story and you can just be Margaret, not the woman who was betrayed by her daughter. And I hope that someday, when enough time has passed and the wound isn't so raw, you can remember me as I was before all of this. The little girl who thought you hung the moon. The medical student who called you crying with joy after her first successful diagnosis. The daughter who genuinely loved you, even if she proved unworthy of your love in return. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything, for all of it. Those words are inadequate, but they're all I have. Goodbye. Emily. I read the letter 3 times. Tears ran down my face, the first tears I'd allowed myself since this nightmare began. Emily was right. She was neither pure victim nor pure villain. She was a complex, flawed human being who'd made catastrophic choices under terrible pressure. That didn't excuse what she'd done, but it made it understandable. Human. Tragic in the truest sense. A good person destroyed by her own weaknesses and someone else's manipulation. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer next to a photo of 5-year-old Emily holding her best mommy drawing. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to forgive her. I didn't know if she deserved forgiveness. But I knew this. I didn't hate her. And maybe, someday, decades from now, I'd be able to remember the good years without the betrayal poisoning every memory. That would have to be enough. This last part of my story is not about what they did to me anymore. It is about what I did with what was left. In the weeks after Brandon's confrontation and Emily's letter, my days felt strangely empty. For years, my life had been defined by 2 things: the business Robert and I built and the daughter we raised. In less than 3 months, both had been ripped out of my hands, one by my own choice, the other by betrayal. I woke up every morning in that anonymous apartment, surrounded by neutral furniture and blank walls, and for a few seconds, I forgot. Then it all came back in a rush. The recordings, the documents, the hospital room, Emily's face when I walked away. There were moments when the silence felt so heavy it was almost physical. But there was also something else in that silence: space. For the first time in decades, I wasn't responsible for employees, clients, contracts, or a grown child who treated me like an endless resource. My phone didn't ring constantly. No one needed a signature, a decision, a favor. It was just me and my thoughts. At first that terrified me. Then, slowly, it started to feel like freedom. 3 months after I sold the business, the court finalized my estate documents. The irrevocable trust was fully in effect. The scholarships had been designed, the selection criteria defined. At the hearing, the judge looked at me over his glasses and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, are you certain you want to exclude your daughter entirely? You understand this cannot be reversed." "I understand," I said. "This is what I want." And she understands why. Outside the courtroom, Patricia put a hand on my arm. "How do you feel?" "Like I've buried someone who's still alive," I admitted. "But also, like I've dug myself out of my own grave." Legally, things fell into place with a cold, methodical logic. Brandon was indicted on multiple charges: insider trading, fraud, attempted tampering with evidence. Dr. Moss accepted a plea deal and agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors, which didn't save him from prison but did reduce his sentence. Emily's medical board hearing resulted in a 2-year suspension, mandatory ethics training, and supervised practice when she eventually returned. She kept her license, but she would never again be the rising star cardiac surgeon everyone once expected. I received updates through Patricia not because I asked, but because she knew that not knowing would gnaw at me. Each time I listened quietly, then nodded and moved on with my day. I wasn't rejoicing in their downfall. I just needed to know the danger had passed. 6 months after everything exploded, I left the city where I had spent most of my life. I sold the house Robert and I had shared to a young family with 2 small children. I stood there at the closing, watching the couple sign papers with the eager energy of people starting their lives together, and I thought, I used to be them. I wished them luck, silently hoping they'd never learn how cruel family can become when money and fear take over. Then I took the check from the sale, handed it straight to the trust administrator, and walked away without looking back. I moved to a small coastal town 3 states away. A quiet place with a walkable main street, a library that still smelled like old paper, and a tiny coffee shop where the barista learned my name after 3 days. I rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony facing the ocean. Nothing fancy, just a place where, when I opened the curtains in the morning, I saw waves instead of the hospital where Robert died. For the first few weeks, I felt like an actress playing a role. I shopped for groceries without anyone recognizing me. I introduced myself simply as Margaret, not Mrs. Whitmore, owner of Whitmore Medical. Nobody asked about my daughter. Nobody knew I'd once been the target of an elaborate inheritance scheme. I was just another older woman starting over in a town full of people who had their own stories. I built a new routine slowly. Morning walks along the boardwalk, afternoons at the library, where I started volunteering twice a week, evenings reading on my balcony, listening to the ocean, and letting its steady rhythm untangle the knots in my chest. One day, the library director asked if I'd be willing to lead a life stories writing group for seniors. "You seem good with words," she said, "and you listen carefully. People open up to you." I almost laughed at the irony. Me, helping other people tell their stories when mine still felt like an exposed nerve. But I agreed. On the first day of the group, 8 women and 2 men showed up, all over 60. Some widowed, some divorced, some never married. We sat in a circle with notebooks and cheap ballpoint pens, and I said, "Your stories matter, even the messy parts, especially the messy parts." They looked at me with a kind of hunger. Then they started to write. As the weeks passed, they shared pieces of their lives. A woman whose son hadn't spoken to her in 15 years. A man who'd lost his business because he trusted the wrong partner. A grandmother who'd raised her grandchildren after her daughter disappeared into addiction. Stories of betrayal. Stories of survival. I never told them my full story. I shared pieces, losing my husband, selling my business, moving to start over. But I didn't talk about the hospital corridor or the recording under my dining room table. Some wounds still belonged only to me. But as I listened to them, I realized something important. I wasn't alone. Betrayal inside families is more common than anyone likes to admit. Greed, entitlement, fear, they twist people into shapes you barely recognize. And the people left behind have to figure out what to do with the pieces. About a year after everything happened, Patricia called with an update I didn't expect. "Emily has finished her suspension period," she said. "The medical board is allowing her to return to practice under supervision at a smaller community hospital. Her ethics instructor wrote a letter describing her as deeply remorseful and significantly changed." I sat at my small kitchen table, tracing the rim of my coffee mug. "Is she okay?" "She's functional," Patricia said carefully. "She lives in a modest apartment, works part-time at a clinic while she rebuilds her credentials, and volunteers at a free cardiac screening program once a month. She hasn't tried to contact you directly again." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Good. Margaret, she did ask me to pass along one thing a few months ago. I didn't want to pressure you, so I waited." "What is it?" "She started a separate scholarship fund for medical students. Small, nothing like yours yet. It's in your name. The Margaret A. Whitmore Compassionate Care Scholarship. She says it's her way of making sure your name isn't tied only to what happened between you two, but to lives saved and careers built." My throat tightened. "Did you tell her about my trust scholarships?" "Yes," she said. She wanted to match your intention in her own small way. I didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, I took a breath. "Thank you for telling me." After that call, I went for a long walk by the water. The sky was overcast, the air sharp with salt. I thought about Emily in some unknown city, putting her name and mine on something good instead of something ruined. I still wasn't ready to see her. I still didn't trust her. But I realized I no longer wanted her to be miserable. I wanted her to live long enough to understand fully what she'd done and to spend the rest of her life choosing better. That night, I took out her letter from the drawer where I'd kept it. I read it again, slowly. The apology, the self-awareness, the acceptance of consequences. Then, for the first time, I wrote back. I kept it short. "Emily, I received word about the scholarship in my name. I heard you're back to practicing in some capacity and that you're cooperating with everything required of you. I am not ready for contact. I don't know if I ever will be. What happened between us will always be a scar on my life. But scars are not open wounds. They're reminders that healing happened, even if the damage remains. I won't pretend everything is fine. It isn't. I won't invite you back into my life. Not now. But I also don't wish you harm. I hope you use the rest of your life to become the kind of woman your younger self wanted to be. Not for me, for you, and for every patient who lies on your operating table trusting you with their heart. Do not write back. If and when I'm ready for more, I'll be the one to reach out. That may never happen. I need you to accept that. Take care of yourself. Do good where you can. Mom." I mailed it to Patricia with instructions to forward it, then went back to my life. My days settled into something that looked a lot like peace. Mornings with coffee on the balcony, watching the sun rise over the water. Afternoons at the library, listening to other seniors share their stories of heartbreak and survival. Occasional meetings with the trust administrator, reviewing reports of scholarship recipients, students whose names I memorized and prayed for in my own quiet way. Sometimes late at night, I still saw Emily's face in that ICU room. Sometimes I woke up from dreams where she was 5 years old again, tugging at my hand, asking me to look at a drawing she'd made. Sometimes I warmed at the memory. Sometimes it hurt. But gradually, the warmth started to outweigh the pain. If you're watching this and you've been betrayed by your own family, I want you to hear this part clearly. What they did to you is not your fault. Their choices are theirs alone. Your job is not to excuse them or destroy yourself trying to understand them. Your job is to protect yourself, to reclaim your life, and to decide what kind of person you will be after the dust settles. Forgiveness is not an obligation. It is not a requirement for healing. Some wounds never fully close. Some relationships are too toxic to restore. And that's okay. But you also don't have to let bitterness be the last word. I'm 67 now, soon to be 68. I've buried a husband, lost a daughter in every way that matters, and built a new life out of the rubble of the old one. I live in a small apartment in a town where nobody knows the ugliest parts of my story unless I choose to tell them. I've funded dozens of scholarships already, and I've received letters from young doctors who say my support changed the course of their lives. Sometimes I sit with those letters spread out on my table and think, this is my legacy now. Not a business, not a house, not a daughter waiting for me to die so she can inherit, but lives saved by strangers whose names I may never know personally. If you've made it this far into my story, maybe you see a bit of yourself in it. Maybe you're dealing with adult children who seem more interested in your assets than your well-being. Maybe you felt that icy shock of realizing someone you love has been planning behind your back. If that's you, please listen carefully. You are not helpless. You are not crazy. You are not just an old woman who should be grateful for any attention you get. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to walk away, even from your own blood, if staying means losing yourself. Have you ever been in a situation where you looked at someone you thought you knew and realized you'd never really seen them at all? If you have, you're not alone. There are thousands of us out here, older women who refused to go quietly, who chose dignity over obligation, who rebuilt their lives when everyone expected them to crumble. If my story has touched you, share it. Talk about it. Tell your own story in the comments. Where are you watching from? Have you ever had to choose between family and your own sanity, your own safety? I can't change what Emily did. I can't go back and undo the documents I signed, the trust I gave, the warning signs I ignored. But I can choose what happens with the years I have left. And I have chosen this: to live fully and consciously. To protect myself without becoming hardened. To help others without sacrificing my own safety. To remember the good without pretending the bad never happened. I don't know if I'll ever see my daughter again. Maybe in 10 years, maybe on my deathbed, maybe never. That uncertainty used to haunt me. Now, it's just another part of my life's landscape, like the scar where my wedding ring used to rest or the ache in my knees when it rains. What I do know is this: I'm not waiting for her anymore. I'm not putting my life on hold in case she comes back. My story doesn't end in that hospital room or that conference room or that courtroom. It continues every morning when I wake up, make my coffee, and look out at the ocean. Every time I sit in a circle with other seniors and say, "Your story matters, write it down." Every time a scholarship check goes out in my name, helping some young woman in a white coat repair a stranger's heart. In the end, the greatest revenge is not watching your betrayers suffer. It's refusing to let their actions define the rest of your life. I'm Margaret Whitmore. I am not just the mother my daughter betrayed. I am not just the target of a failed inheritance scheme. I am a woman who survived, who fought back, and who found a way to turn her pain into something that might, just might, leave the world a little better than she found it. And if you're still here with me, maybe you can too.